Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. We have the pleasure of having one of our team members with us here at Innovia, Mary Malone. She is one of our customer engagement specialists, and she will be presenting on customer voice. What do you say? Listen to your customers with Microsoft's customer voice. As a reminder, we are recording this webinar, and we will post it to our on-demand webinar library for you to review again or share with anyone. And you can find our library under our resources tab on our website at innovia.com. And we do encourage you to ask questions during our presentation, so please feel free to type them into the questions box and we will answer them at the end of our session. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mary to kick off our presentation.
Hi, Angie. Sorry about that, a little technical problem on my end.
Not a problem.
Hi, I'm Mary Malone, and I'm excited to be here with you today. I actually like to wave when I do that, so give me just one sec. Hi, I'm Mary Malone, and I am a customer engagement specialist here at Innovia. But what I bring to the table here is a secret background of having spent about 35 years doing survey research and analysis, helping organizations, mostly healthcare organizations, improve customer service, employee satisfaction, and among other things. I've worked with banks, I've worked with truck drivers, lots of different ways of trying to improve the customer experience based upon the results of customer satisfaction surveys. What I'm going to do today is share with you some ideas about voice of the customer, and then talk about Microsoft's customer voice. I'm going to talk about how you can use survey data. I'm going to talk about Innovia's voice process for implementing surveys, and then some of the resources that Innovia has put together around customer voice. And as Angie mentioned, I'm happy to answer any questions as we go, but I've allocated time at the end for your questions. So I want to talk just for a minute about the voice of the customer. What is the voice of the customer? So the voice of the customer, and actually I should step back and say this, there's lots of different kinds of folks that you may want to listen to, whether they're your stakeholders, vendors. I'm going to talk a little bit about the general public. I'm going to focus today on the voice of the customer, but there's lots of other people, I even mentioned earlier, employees, that you may want to be speaking to and asking questions of and listening to what they have to say. For right now, I'm just going to talk about the voice of the customer, but I'll come back and talk a little bit about some other examples as well. So when we listen to the voice of the customer, I was talking to somebody earlier about this today, it really has to do with what are we listening? What are they saying? And where can we listen to them in terms of their journey? I mean, we can listen to what they have to say about our websites. We can listen to what they have to say about the experience of buying something. We can listen to them right after they get a new product. We can listen to what they have to say about their product. We can listen to them after 2 years of them being a customer of ours for all sorts of different products. But the idea is you want to use that information to design customer journeys. And I'm not going to talk about designing customer journeys today, but it's really important to know what your customers are thinking so that you know where to improve the design of their journey with your organization. Now, a lot of us are familiar with listening to the voice of the process. So the voice of the process is usually looking at Lean or Six Sigma or value stream mapping or any of those other quality improvement tools that we use to make improvements in the structure of our organizations, or if we have a process in the organization. But what we're doing when we're listening to the customer voice is we're looking at a particular kind of outcome, and we're saying, here's the voice of the customer as it relates to what our structure and our process does. And so at the end of the day, the outcome that matters to the customer is the outcome that they experience. And that's where we should turn our focus and emphasize data collection. And that's what I'm going to do here. So the second part of the outline then is, if that was generally what's the voice of the customer, The second part of the outline then is, what is Dynamics 365 customer voice? And the way I like to think about it is that it surveys with data so that you can do something about the result. But it's fully integrated into the Microsoft system. So let me talk about that for just a moment. So Dynamics 365 is for customer voice, or customer voice is a feedback management application that allows you to keep track of your customer metrics that matter the most to your business. So if you want to keep track of something called a net promoter score, the likelihood of recommending your organization, or if you want to learn more about a particular product, or if you want to ask a customer who hasn't bought from you in a while, what would it take for them to buy you in a while? It allows you to get that feedback on things that really matter to your organization, again, here from the customer perspective. You can also use it, customer voice, to measure employee satisfaction as well. But again, today the focus is on the customer. It's fully integrated with a very deep integration around all of the Microsoft business applications. So Forms is where it starts, but it's also fully integrated with the Power Platform. And what does that mean? Well, the customer voice started out as Microsoft Forms, which allows you to do a little bit of data analysis. But what customer voice has added to it is it allows you to create and distribute the surveys yourself, and it uses data from the Dataverse and can draw in the resources from Power Automate and the Power Platform and Power Apps to become a full survey system, fully integrated, so that you can go literally from soup to nuts in the platform that you're already familiar with and already using. Customer voice is actually included in 6 of the Dynamics 365 products. If you don't have one of these and say you're simply included, you're on BC, it's about $200, or even now if it's about $200 a month, and that comes with 2,000 responses, not outgoing surveys. So probably if you get a 30%, 33% response rate on something, that would allow you to send 6,000 surveys out per month. So it's something you already have in some cases, something that you almost have in other cases, and it's all part of the Microsoft Dataverse, again, that soup net function. So that's from a big picture perspective, 30,000 foot, what customer voice is. It may be a little bit easier to see it if I use the various icons and talk about where the different roles of the different apps. So Dataverse is where all of your data sits. Customer voice allows you to create and distribute the surveys and sends the results back to the Dataverse to be fully integrated with whatever data you have, BC, NAV, etc. The Power Apps can be set up to allow you to browse the surveys and responses without having to go all the way to the Dataverse. Oops, all the way to the Dataverse. But when you get your data in the Dataverse, it also allows for the sophisticated analysis by Power BI. And then Power Automate allows you to automatically distribute the survey based upon a trigger or an event. So let's say you want to send a survey to a client when they've been with you for a year, or you want to send a survey to somebody after they've purchased a particular product, or you want to send a survey to somebody who hasn't bought from you. Those are all the kinds of triggers that you can send out that automate the process of sending the survey to people, to a customer who meets a certain feature. You can also use it and send it to everybody on the list, and then automatically use it to automate the follow-ups to it. So if you want to make sure that you send a follow-up every 7 days for the first 21 days, it can do that automatically as well. And then you can also create follow-up actions in Power Automate, such as a survey comes back and somebody has requested a phone call. You can set up a flow that says, this is the person that I want to see that survey because they're set up as the person who's going to call. If somebody gives a particularly low score in an area, you may also automatically have set up, if somebody gives us lower than a 3 out of 5, I want my director of accounts payable to take a look at that particular kind of survey, depending on what the question is. So the idea is all of these are working together to provide, again, a soup to nuts system of being able to analyze, create surveys, send them out, and analyze the data, as well as link it to other sources of data in your Microsoft system. What I'm going to do now is, just for the moment, is just to take a minute and just say, does anybody have any questions? I don't see any in the chat, but that was a lot to absorb. And so I just wanted to stop for a minute before I talk more and more generally about customer surveys. And all right, well, seeing no questions, unless you're a really, really slow typer, and I'll get back to you if you are, I'm going to go ahead now and go and talk a little bit more about survey data and just to remind people about, some of the times and places, though I've mentioned some, that you might want to look at some survey data. So. All right, there we go. Should be seeing my screen now, and we should move on. All right. So when we talk about survey data, surveys can be really important metrics for both management and decision making. So let's say you want to survey customers every year and give some sense of their likelihood of recommending, or something that a lot of folks use as a net promoter score, which is on a scale of 0 to 10. You take the people that give you the highest scores, and you take the people who give you the lowest scores, and you sort of say, what percent of the people give me the median, or the highest scores subtracted from the lowest scores? That's the people that are most likely to promote you. So the net of all those scores is a net promoter score. And a lot of companies, maybe yours does, already use that information. So that's something that you might want to measure on an ongoing managing metric. The other kind of customer satisfaction data that's important is the kind that you might use for decision making. So you might want to ask people, I don't know, something simple like, our next, what topics would you like in the newsletter next month, and give people a choice. Or what attributes would you like on a particular product? Or if a product is going to cost X and we can only put these 3 things into it, which would of these 10 would be the most important to you? There's lots of ways that you can incorporate the customer's voice into decision making, and using surveys, you can often find ways to find out what your customer's voice is saying. So I've mentioned these, but again, I think it's worth just kind of thinking about it. And if we were live in a room, I'd probably put somebody on the spot, but I won't do that in a webinar. But again, you could ask customers, whether they're executives or users of your service or your product. You might also do a survey of internal customers. Your finance department might want to find out from all the people that it touches with budgets and things, how are they doing? Or your IT department or your HR department might want to send out notes to internal customers and see how they're doing in serving the needs of, say, a group of managers or group of vice presidents. I've mentioned several different times you might want to look for employee satisfaction. You could also query your vendors, you query prospects, or you could even query the general public. One of the neat things about Microsoft Voice surveys is that a QR code gets created for every survey. And so if you wanted to include that on any kind of advertising or printed material on your website, or anything, you're at a conference or whatever, and you want people to take a survey about anything, maybe what your next product could be or should be or whatever, they can actually use the QR code, and that survey just stays open for as long as you want. So the general public can comment as well, or if not the total general public, people at a trade show who might be interested in your service. The idea too is to think about is when you're thinking about a survey, is it going to be something that you're going to look at overall satisfaction, or some event based, so purchase of a product type of satisfaction, and then are you going to do it at a point in time once a year you're going to measure satisfaction, or is it something that you're going to do on an ongoing basis? So you could say, I'm going to measure people's satisfaction with a product every time they purchase, anytime a product is purchased, or once a year, I'm going to go back and survey everybody who bought that product last year. And when you start to think about who to survey, you can grab that data out of your ERP, out of BC or NAV or your CRM, and then the characteristics of those folks, whether they bought something in the last year, whether they haven't bought in the last year, is information that you can also grab out of the Dataverse. Now, the only problem that I have, and I hope you're at least giggling here, that surveys and sausages, is that we've seen in the last probably 15, specifically 10 years, a lot of growth in survey tools. And I think, here I kind of make fun of everybody can do a survey. I think what's really important is not to lose, just because a survey is easy to create, doesn't mean that you've got a well-developed process around a survey, nor does it even mean it's a good survey. And so because of the time that I've spent in the survey industry, I really encourage people to put developing the survey questions at the end, but to ask some other important questions first, because garbage in is going to be garbage out. And the process of surveying has as much to do with getting the garbage in as the questions do. So for the next part of this, I'm going to talk about Innovia's voice process. We came up with this idea to fit with the customer voice sentiment from Microsoft. And we came up with 5 steps that you should think about when you're implementing a survey process. So the first is vet your ideas. The second is to organize your process. The third is to integrate the data. The fourth is to use customer voice. And then the fifth is to engage with your data at the end. I'm going to go through a little bit with each one of these and talk a little bit about why that step is important. So the first one is to vet your ideas. And the reason it's important is just to get together and to talk about, hey, I think we want to know more about X, is because sometimes the best way isn't to do a survey. Or another way of thinking about it is a survey is not the only way to collect data. There's lots of other ways that you could do it. You can do it in an interview or a focus group. You can, in this particular case, we're talking about sort of a computerized survey or digital survey, but phone surveys are also possible as well. You could ask people to send you comments and just have comments that you get from people, letters, anything, and analyze those. You could have anybody who's made a complaint via any kind of chat instrument or any other way you collect complaints be a way that you're measuring the voice of the customer. It doesn't always have to be a survey, and it might be a survey in conjunction with other information. I say that because lots of people have the idea that we're going to do a survey because they're so easy to create without having thought through other pieces of the pie. And so when you vet the survey or vet the idea, you also want to be thinking about how you're going to organize, integrate the data, etc., which is why we go to the next step, which is to organize the survey process. In my mind, organizing the survey process is the most important piece of the puzzle. I like to spend probably 3 to 4 times as much time on organizing the process as I do on any other step. And the organizing the process is everything from the very first pre-notification that you're sending out to prepare people that a survey is going to be coming, and everything you do with pre-notification to increase your response rates, to everything that you're going to do at the end in terms of analyzing the data and presenting it. And when are you going to present it to the folks that matter, maybe your stakeholders or your leadership team? But when are you also going to share that information and what you're doing with it back to the people who participated in the survey and back to everybody that you offered the survey to? I had a standing agreement with my clients that I wouldn't schedule a survey to be administered until we had a firm date on the calendar and for presenting the results with to the leadership groups and then other groups that mattered. If those dates weren't on the calendar, then we weren't serious about what we were going to do with the data. And that meant that we were wasting the goodwill of the people who were responding. So I'm a big believer in the goodwill of the people who respond. We want to make the burden on them as low as possible. And we want to get the most information that we can. And we do that by thinking about how we organize the survey process. Just a few things to consider. I've mentioned pre-notifying your audience. There's a lot of ways that you can be thinking about how you can let somebody know that a survey is coming. Again, these are mostly, you can mention it in email, put it in your email signature, any kind of newsletter or ongoing communication that you have, mention it in conversations with them. So if I was talking to a client and I knew that we were going to have our annual survey coming up, every time I spoke with them for a month, I might say at the end of the call, hey, don't forget on April 20th, we're going to be sending out a survey and we'd really appreciate your filling it out. What you have to say determines our direction, and we really want to listen to that. The whole idea is listening back, listening to the customer's voice. But people make mistakes in some other ways too. This is probably one of my favorite ways. It's a non-digital survey, but the organization worked really hard to develop a suggestion for the box and questionnaire for their employees. And unfortunately, everything spoke because it was located right over the shredder. Now, most of you may have kind of giggled or smiled to yourself. I can't hear those when we're on a webinar. But those aren't the most egregious mistakes, or that's not the most egregious mistakes I've ever seen. But you get the idea that you can mess it up by not thinking through the whole thing. And another way to mess it up is at the end of the survey, you're going to give the results to people who then may be charged with making improvements or changes. And maybe those people aren't comfortable with the survey or threatened by the results, haven't been trained how to share them with a group, and you end up with something like this. Again, there's no bad intent. They did the survey right, but they didn't think through the whole process of how the survey was going to be, the results were going to be shared and put to use. So again, this is why I spend so much time in the survey development. Now, the next piece is pretty straightforward. This is where you have the opportunity to integrate your data. And we've already touched upon the ways that you can integrate it. So you can use the Power Automate to grab the data about how long somebody's been a customer, for example, or what they bought, and send the surveys out. But you can also use that data to perform analyses later on. So when you create a survey, you may decide one of the things that you want to divide the data up later is by how much they spent with you last year. So it matters. I want to listen to the voice of a customer that spends $1 million with us differently than, say, a customer that spends $100,000. Well, rather than put the burden of answering that question on your customer, you have the ability to integrate the data that comes from the survey with any data that's available through your ERP or BC, SaaS or ERP or any other system. So if you wanted to tie it into an HR system or a pay system, whatever works for you in terms of the sources of your data that you want to analyze. The key is to do it at the beginning, because if you don't have the data, then you have to ask it. And if you have the data and you're not linking to it or knowing how you're going to use it later, then you're putting a burden on them to answer an unnecessary question. And why have a customer put their zip code where they're located if you already have that information? But once you know where they're located by zip code, that's great. But then you have to figure out, like if you wanted to do analysis of North and South regions, unless you've assigned them to a region, then you have to do all that with zip codes. So again, it's thinking through what data you have and how you want to use it. I've long believed that if you torture data long enough, it'll confess. You'll learn things. The better you are at getting the different pieces of the data together. So I think about drilling down to see if the customer perceptions vary by different customer characteristics. So who a person is, or what kind of company it is, what did people buy, where are they located, when did they buy, all of those different characteristics that you can think of help you to drill into the data and see where perceptions might be different or vary by those different customer characteristics. That's the opportunity you have to integrate the data. The next piece is actually using customer voice. So the C is actually using customer voice. And using customer voice allows you to design the surveys and deploy the surveys. So I'm just going to give a simple example. This is not one that's fully integrated with data because that's not the purpose of it, but I just want to give you a visual of how this process might work. So last year, the Toledo group wanted to think about where they wanted to have a meeting or how often it should meet, etc. So we created this survey using the Microsoft Forms function with customer voice. And so once the survey was created, it automatically generated the QR code. And so an attendee hits the QR code, they receive a complete survey. The survey is here, and then basically in real time, you can have analysis of the survey data as they come in. So it's really neat for polling if you wanted to do some quick polling during a meeting as well. In this particular case, we also sent an email, sent the post-meeting email when we asked people to fill out the survey as well. And that was, you can do it with the QR code or not, actually. But what it does is it gets you to design a survey, which can be distributed any different way. It gets you a QR code, and it gets you some very basic analysis of the survey data. Everything after that is just how you decide to use the more complex, maybe, or additive features in customer voice. Again, who do you want to send it to? What other data do you want linked to it? What will trigger the survey going out? How often do you want to remind them about it? Do you want to send a thank you note after you receive the survey? And do you want the data, not just the basic data available, but do you want to then feed that data into the Dataverse and do some analysis with Power BI? And again, just to reiterate, because that's asking a lot of words and a lot of different functions, you're using customer voice to create and distribute the surveys. It records the results back to the Dataverse. Power Apps can be used to quickly browse through the surveys and responses. Power Automate can send them based on a trigger and do other related survey items based on a trigger and create follow-up actions based on the results. And then the Dataverse can feed it into Power BI. And then engaging with your data is the last step. Now, there's lots and lots of different ways to analyze the data. As I mentioned, you get some very simple, mostly descriptive statistics, but you can also use Power BI, as I mentioned. And that really depends upon the kind of, going back to when you designed the survey, even when you vetted the survey, is this just a quickie one-time thing and we just want the descriptive statistics, how many people said X to this question? Maybe it's what do they want featured in the next newsletter? There's no need to do a huge amount of analysis on that. But if you're thinking about using it to really incorporate maybe into product development or dig deep into an area of your organization where you're going to want some changes to it, then you might want to spend more time on the analysis. And that's where Power BI can be helpful to give you visuals and some ability to use dynamic selection and slicing that can be helpful for a more sophisticated type of analysis. However, the other thing that's true about analyzing the data, and again, this goes back to thinking about the original concept of organizing the survey, is sadly, I've seen this action plan happen more than once. The data comes back and we haven't explained why the survey is well done, or that it's been vetted, or that people have done some good psychometric analysis and compared who responded and who didn't, and sort of used the tools of good surveying, and you end up with somebody who feels like we shouldn't ask those questions again. And unfortunately, that's more common than you would think. So now the final piece I want to talk about is just some of the Innovia resources that we've put together to help you, whether or not to use customer voice, or even if you just want to talk about how you might use customer voice. One is to talk to any of my peers in the customer engagement team. You can also review what we have. It's a very straightforward, anovia.com/customer-voice. That opens up a variety of resources that we've put together. To give you a sense of sort of pricing on that, working with our power team, a very simple, straightforward survey that you wanted to do every year would be about $2,000 plus licensing if you needed it. And again, a very high-end premium package, it's about $10,000. And of course, surveys can cost way more than that, depending on what you need. But between those two numbers, 2,000 and 10,000, there's a lot of opportunities to get a lot of surveys, to learn a lot of different things, again, whether about your customers, former customers, employees, how you're serving different groups of departments within your organization. And then the final thing is you can always contact me. I'm very, very geeky and very, very excited about the opportunity to make it's so easy to send surveys, but I've spent a lot of time helping people do a better job at it, and I can walk you through the voice, if you will, the voice process that Anovia has put together, and then match that up with maybe one of the packages that our power team has put together. So again, a couple of key takeaways as I finish this up. Customer voice lets you get the feedback you need and work with your existing data. With Power Automate, you can distribute the surveys and automate a lot of the actions around the surveys, whether it's reminders, thank yous, follow-up, sending the survey out to be responded to directly, and linking the Dataverse and Power BI and the Power functions can really produce some rich analytics for it. Because when it comes to fixing the customer experience, it's really difficult to set goals if you're flying blind. And the survey can help take some of the blinders off and allow you to get closer to your target. Again, I'm Mary Malone. I love surveys. I'm kind of a data geek, and I'd love to help you put customer voice to use in your organization. I'm going to ask if anybody has any questions, or I would normally ask who has the first question.
Thank you, Mary. How do I go about getting started if I wanted to take advantage of this?
So I would say shoot an email over to me, mmalone@anovia.com, and maybe you and a couple of your teammates who want to talk about it, and we can vet the ideas together. It's no problem. We can spend 15-20 minutes just talking about what you're thinking of in terms of a survey, or more what do you want to learn. Then we can talk about would a survey be appropriate for it, and then if we think that's the right way to go, then I'd engage our folks on the power team, and I work with them throughout the process to get you a good survey process, a good survey tool, and good analytics at the end.
Okay, thank you. And approximately how long do you think it would take to get it created and built so I can fully utilize it? What's the time frame of that?
So you could actually develop a survey. I almost hate to say this, but you could develop a survey in 15 minutes. But if you recall, I said garbage in, garbage out might not be a good survey You might not have thought through the development of it. The actual creation of the survey is very straightforward and very easy in customer voice, again, based on forms. But I would say thoughtfully put together the whole program, I'd say it'd probably take about a month. And that's probably good because you want to get that pre-notification out while you're working on the survey, figuring out who you're going to send it to, figuring out the integration of the data, all that kind of stuff. It gives you time to pre-notify that it's coming. And that's a really key step that I don't think people want to miss. So. All right, well, I have
All right,
just one more slide I'd like to share, and
Mary.
that is that you can't fatten a calf by weighing it. So remember that sending the survey is not the important stuff. The getting a good survey is important. Sending it out really matters. But if you've asked people to respond to it, you really need to use that data, if you will, to fatten the calf. You've weighed it, you know something about it, but you got to do something with the data in the end.
Good point, Mary. A question came through. It's actually a very good one. I was trying to figure out how
Oh,
to
okay.
ask, and they asked it just perfect. What are some parameters to consider so people don't feel survey fatigue? And also, how much is too much communication surrounding a survey?
Well, yeah. So let's take the too much communication. If it's integrated with other communications that you're doing, I don't think it's too much. I think it all depends on, very case specific. So for example, if you tell somebody that it's coming a year in advance, they're going to forget it. So don't, but during a 4-month window, or sorry, a 4-week window, to be letting people know it's coming is probably a good idea. Now, if it's somebody who's buying a product from you, let's say, maybe you want to tell them, like, right when it's in their cart, hey, the last thing before it ships is, don't forget, when this arrives, give it a use for a little while, and then, we really would appreciate you responding to the survey that we're going to send 2 weeks later. So, you don't have that many interactions with them. You have a limited number of ways that you can get them to respond. The other way people do surveys is it's on the back of every receipt, but how many of us, they've notified us, but how many of us go and do that? There's lots of ways to use notification. I think it's case specific about how you do. The other question, though, about survey fatigue is really important. So there, you can do A, Bs. You can send one version of a survey to a small group and a B version to another group. You can see if they're completing all of the questions. But there's a lot to survey design that can help lessen the response burden and make it easier to fill out. So one is in the invitation to tell them something like, you're going to get a survey, click here, you'll get the survey. It's 10 questions long. It will take you 3 minutes to fill out. Then you've set the expectation. You've given them the choice about participating. I stay in a lot of hotels and nothing makes me madder. Then you answer that first question, and then all of a sudden there's 45 questions about the hotel. I'm not going to fill it out. Then you've only gotten one piece of information from me. But if you say, I'm going to ask you 10 questions about your stay, then I'm going to do it. Or I'm going to ask you 10 questions about your stay, and then I'm going to ask you 5 more questions about your room. So they get 10 overall questions and 5 room specific ones. That way you're not making the burden so big every single time. And you play around with it to see which gets the most responses, but it is a very good question. The other thing is, don't change response rates all the time. If you're going to ask people for a comment, strategically place the comment sections near sections of the survey that matters. there's a lot that you can do to make it easy for people to take their time and fill it out. But people have been burned so many times by surveys, you have to make an extra effort to get around all of the horrible experiences that they've had. And that's where I think working with someone who's had a lot of experience can help. Whether that's me or anybody else, there's lots of people, they're called psychometricians, not psychomagicians, but psychometricians, can share their survey expertise as well.
All right, thank you, Mary. I believe those were all the questions that we have for you today. If anybody has any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to your customer engagement specialist here at Innovia, or you can contact Mary directly. Thank you again, Mary, for the presentation. I thought it went very well and it was very informative.
Thanks, Angie. It was fun to do too.
You can check out our website for more of our upcoming events, and that's innovia.com/events. And you can also check out our training workshop page at innovia.com/workshops. We do have a variety of workshops to fit your role, so check out the ones that are right for you and your team. And if you have not heard the latest Innovia Conversation podcast, we have a library of podcast episodes for you to listen to, and you can learn more on our podcast page, and that's innovia.com/podcast. So browse through our selection and subscribe, so you'll get notified when those new episodes air. And we do have our customer conference information on our website. Visit our conference page at innovia.com/conferences. The Innovia Customer Conference is a free event for you to attend, so check out that conference page to learn more and to register for our event. And you can also register for Dynamics Con Live. Both conferences are back-to-back at the same venue starting on May 21st in beautiful Scottsdale, Arizona. So register now so you don't miss out on these great events. All right, well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us. If you're watching on demand, thank you for taking the time out to watch this, and we look forward to seeing you soon at another Innovia webinar. Take care, everyone. Thanks again, Mary.
Bye, Angie. Thanks, everyone.